With growth, our economy does reasonably well. Without growth, it has some issues. 2009, the world GDP shrank by 2%, and it felt like our financial system, the wheel fell off that cart, it went into a ditch, it caught on fire, and then the ditch slumped over a cliff. I mean, it was awful. And that was what happens with minus 2% growth. Plus 2%, we wouldn't be having the same sense of urgency around this. That's what I mean by require. Our economy is really functioned to grow. And it all starts with this idea of money itself. And I don't care what color your money, I don't care whose picture's on it, I don't care about any of these things. The IMF and the World Bank together have said if you want to be part of the international community, meaning if you want to trade, your money has to share some characteristics with ours. And that one characteristic is there's only one thing they really care about, and it's this. You can do whatever you want with your money, but you have to loan it into existence. That's sort of the base requirement. All money is loaned into existence. So think about that for a second. What it means is that when Bill Gates takes his $40 billion of wealth, puts it off in an interest-bearing account at 5%, and earns $2 billion on that, where'd that $2 billion come from? Well, I can tell you right now, it's that $2 billion of income for Bill Gates in that situation is $2 billion in loans that somebody else had to take out. There is no other mechanism by which money comes into creation. And so it leads to a key concept of the crash course. You know, say that all this money is loaned into existence. It has this one feature that we can just describe without saying whether it's good or bad or any of that. At any one point in time, there's always more debt in a society that has a debt-based money system than there is money. It's just a feature. So if you like data, consider that right now there's $52 trillion in total credit market debt in the U.S., 52. There's about $14 trillion of money. So you can start to see there's a difficulty in maybe lining those concepts up. If you ever wanted to pay it all back, it gets a little bit tricky. But what it leads to is this concept here, that perpetual growth then becomes a requirement of our modern banking system. And that's just a feature that it happens to have. So, okay, so we hold that feature off to the side, and we want to ask some questions about, well, what does that look like? What does it mean? What are the implications of that? Because it does have some really powerful implications. The first is I want to toss up a chart here. This is looking at debt to GDP, so it's a ratio. That left axis is in percent. So if you see a number like 200, it means there's twice as much debt as GDP. And we start all the way on the left in 1925 and can go through about 2008 in this chart. Now, yeah, there's a little bump here that actually starts in 1929. And it starts not because we started really piling on the debt at the beginning of the Great Depression. It's rather that the GDP fell away from under this particular ratio. Otherwise, that's an anomaly. Our country had always maintained a ratio of debt to income, because that's what GDP really is, your income, of less than 200%. And then somewhere in the early 80s, we completely and utterly changed our relationship to debt. So when I say the next 20 years is going to be like the last 20 years, in order for it to look like the last 20 years, that yellow line has to continue up uninterrupted in the same trajectory. You and I, and everybody in this room, basically formed our adult impressions about how the economy works while situated on that line that's sloping up at about 40 degrees. And we've been there so long it looks like level horizon to us. Now, what is debt, though? What really is debt? It's one very important thing about debt. Yeah, it's got this principal component, it's got interest, there's all different forms. It's a claim on future money. That's all it is. So when we go into debt, what we're really doing is it's like boring a hole into the future and pulling consumption back, or taking prosperity from the future, spending it today. But when we get there, and we will eventually, we're going to have to repay that debt. Yeah, you can default on it too, but for a country that imports 2/3 of its energy needs, defaulting is not a realistic option. It's something that we just have to deal with. And this isn't just a U.S. story. I have to tell this story all over the world now. Here in the blue is the official net debt. Those are the comforting things we read about in the paper, like, oh, the U.S. debt isn't as bad as Japan's at this point. Those are the little blue ones. The green includes what we call off-balance sheet. Those are the entitlements. That's Social Security. These are the liabilities, but they're not strictly debt. But it really is the debt of the nation, because whether you choose to pay your elderly people their promised entitlement payments or not, somebody's going to have to eat that cost, either so cost on one side or another. So it really is truly a global phenomenon, and we do not have any historical period anywhere in the record where any country has ever dug out for more than 260% of debt to GDP, and it happened once. It happened once from 1815 to about 1890 in England, after they had gone through the Napoleonic Wars. They had this Corsican upstart they had to deal with, and they did pay that down. But it's important to remember that A, they were able to turn off their war expenditures, just like, there was no structural component. They just flipped those off. The people went back to the farms, and they had this thing called the Industrial Revolution fire up, which helped them pay for it. So if we've got an Industrial Revolution, version 2.0, this will be a really great thing to sort of discover very soon. So I can simplify our economy with just 2 words. It doesn't have to be all that complicated. Our economy must grow.